Picture this. Durham, 1006. Four local women stand over wooden tubs, their arms plunged elbow-deep into pink, frothy water. At first glance, you'd think they're doing laundry, but they aren't washing clothes. They're scrubbing severed human heads. And if you look closer, you'll notice something even more unsettling. Their hands aren't careless. They're meticulous. They're gently combing wet hair. They're braiding beards. They're styling the dead like clients before a royal appearance. Because that's exactly what these heads are, a transaction. For every head they make presentable, they receive one cow. This isn't some twisted fantasy out of a horror script. This was calculated psychological warfare, carried out by a man far more dangerous than his television counterpart. Today, we're diving into the brutal life of the real Uhtred the Bold, and this macabre beauty salon, this grotesque aftermath of the siege of Durham, was his opening statement to the world. But before we unravel these forgotten stories of survival, betrayal, and suffering, if you enjoy uncovering the hidden truths of history, hit that like button, subscribe for more content like this, and comment below where you're listening from. I genuinely love seeing how people from all over the world end up connected through these ancient stories, across time and space, through nothing but curiosity. Now, to understand the heads, you have to understand the desperation. In the year 1006, northern England was collapsing. King Ethelred the Unready sat paralyzed in the south, caught in endless paranoia, while King Malcolm II of Scotland saw opportunity. And the Scots didn't just raid, they invaded. They swept through Northumbria, burning villages, taking food, destroying roads, and closing in on the strategic fortress city of Durham. Their goal wasn't a quick strike. It was starvation. They intended to strangle the city until it surrendered, and to break the English north permanently. Durham's defense fell to Waltheof, Earl of Bamburgh. But Waltheof was old, ancient by warrior standards, his blood thin, his nerve fading, his body no longer built for siege warfare and battlefield chaos. And when the Scottish storm hit, he didn't fight. He locked himself inside Bamburgh Castle miles away and shut his eyes. He abandoned Durham to the butchers. His son, Uhtred, watched it happen, watched his father fold, and in that moment, Uhtred realized something terrifying. No help was coming. Not from the king, not from the earl. No orders, no reinforcements, no rescue. So Uhtred seized command. He didn't follow the official chain of authority. He bypassed politics entirely and went straight to the warriors. He rode out and rallied fighting men from Bernicia and York, not with grand speeches about patriotism or honor, but with one brutal truth: survive or be erased. And somehow, through sheer will alone, he forged an army in the shadow of disaster. Then he marched straight into the teeth of the Scottish siege. The attack was fast, devastating. Uhtred's forces caught the Scots unprepared, and they didn't just break the siege, they slaughtered the invaders. The fields outside Durham became a graveyard for Scottish nobility. Men of status, men of bloodline, men who thought victory was inevitable, left dead in the mud. King Malcolm barely escaped. He fled north, abandoning his best warriors like garbage in the dirt. But Uhtred wasn't satisfied. A victory wasn't enough. He needed to secure power. He needed to make sure the Scots never returned. And he needed the entire region to understand what happened here. So he gave an order, not to burn villages, not to raise a flag, but to sever heads. He demanded the heads of the most handsome and high-ranking Scots be cut from their bodies. And this brings us back to the washerwomen. Uhtred paid them to groom these heads like trophies because he didn't want rotting meat on spikes. He wanted faces, recognizable faces. He wanted travelers approaching Durham to look up and see their fallen lords staring back down with braided hair and carefully combed beards. And so the heads were impaled on stakes along the walls, a gallery of death, a public exhibition that screamed one message. This is what happens when you come for the north, the message landed. King Ethelred, impressed by this ruthless efficiency, summoned Uhtred. And in a moment that changed everything, the king stripped the old Earl Walthif of his titles and handed everything to his son. Uhtred returned north as Earl of Bamberg and York, the undisputed master of the borderlands. He had won his earldom with blood and iron, but as the Scots retreated, a much darker shadow was lengthening over the North Sea, because the Vikings were watching. If you're a fan of The Last Kingdom, you probably picture Uhtred as a rugged pagan warrior born in the 9th century, fighting beside Alfred the Great and constantly bickering with priests. That Uhtred is a masterpiece of fiction. The real man we're following lived a full century later. He didn't fight for Alfred. He fought for Alfred's great-great-grandson. And the most shocking difference of all is his relationship with God. The real Uhtred wasn't a pagan outsider mocking the church. He was the church's most valuable business partner. Because Uhtred understood something vital. Swords alone didn't create power. Legitimacy did. And in Anglo-Saxon England, the church held the keys to land, administration, and authority. So Uhtred didn't burn churches. He built his dynasty through them. His first strategic move wasn't a battle. It was a wedding. He married Ecfreda, daughter of Bishop Alden of Durham. And yes, this was forbidden by canon law. Bishops weren't supposed to have daughters publicly available for marriage. But in the pragmatic North, rules bent when power demanded it. This marriage brought Uhtred massive estates tied to the church. He didn't steal the land. He married it. And in return, he became the bishop's enforcer. Far from attacking holy ground, the real Uhtred personally helped clear land for Durham's first cathedral. Picture it. The ferocious warlord, not desecrating sacred space, but hauling stones, directing laborers, helping build the very altar his fictional counterpart would have hated. But Uhtred's loyalty was never truly to God. It was to ambition. And when the political winds shifted, so did he. After securing his base in Bernicia, Uhtred turned his eyes south toward York. And to rule York, the Danish-influenced heart of the north, he needed a new alliance. He found it in Siege, daughter of a wealthy magnate named Styr. Only one problem. Uhtred was already married. Most men would hesitate. Uhtred simply sent Ecfreda back to her father. He repudiated her, discarded his wife like an expired contract. The bishop was furious, humiliated, and he reclaimed the church lands he'd granted as dowry. Uhtred didn't care, because he'd already moved on to the next deal, and Styr, his new father-in-law, had demands of his own. He would give Uhtred his daughter and his support in York. But only if Uhtred promised to kill Styr's worst enemy. A nobleman named Thurbrand the Hold. Remember that name. Because by agreeing to this hitman contract, Uhtred didn't just gain a wife. He inherited a blood feud, one that would eventually consume him. But even 2 wives weren't enough for a man climbing this fast. After the victory at Durham, King Ethelred offered Uhtred the ultimate prize, his own daughter, Princess Elgifu. And for the 3rd time, Uhtred rearranged his private life like a political chessboard. He set aside Siege and married into the royal family. This isn't romance. This is strategy. It paints a portrait of a man who treated marriage like a series of non-aggression pacts, constantly trading up, always tightening his grip. By marrying the king's daughter, Uhtred wasn't just a northern earl anymore. He was blood-connected to the House of Wessex. He became brother-in-law to the future King Edmund Ironside. He reached the absolute top of English society. So forget the lone wolf warrior. The historical Uhtred was the ultimate insider. Within just a few years, he became the bishop's son-in-law, the rich man's hired blade, and the king's family. He bound the church, the northern aristocracy, and the crown to his name, and for a while he seemed untouchable. But in building a tower of alliances, he also built a tower of enemies. The bishop was scorned. The family of his second wife was used and discarded, and Thurbrand the Bold was still alive, watching, waiting, because Thurbrand didn't forget. And the moment Uhtred's structure became too heavy to stand, Thurbrand would be there to knock it over. That moment arrived with sails on the horizon, because while Uhtred was collecting wives and braiding Scottish heads, the king he served was busy digging England's grave. To understand the catastrophe about to engulf the north, we have to look south, into the court of King Ethelred the Unready. History likes to turn Ethelred into a joke, a bumbling fool, a king tripping over his own sword. But the truth is darker. Ethelred wasn't stupid. He was paralyzed. His court was a viper's nest of rival factions, betrayal, paranoia, and whispers behind curtains. His nickname, Unready, doesn't mean foolish. It's closer to ill-advised, a man who listened to everyone and trusted no one. England under Ethelred was wealthy, but it was bleeding to death. For decades, the Vikings hadn't just raided, they extorted. Ethelred's primary defense strategy was the Danegeld, massive payments of silver to buy off invaders. It was protection money. And like anyone who deals with blackmailers knows, paying doesn't stop them. It teaches them you have more. But Ethelred made a mistake far worse than cowardice. He committed a crime that doomed his kingdom. Years before Uhtred rose in the north, the king fell into a fit of terrified paranoia. He believed Danish settlers living peacefully in England were plotting against him. So on St. Brice's Day, he gave a secret order: slay all the Danish men who are in England. It was ethnic cleansing. In towns across the south, neighbors turned on neighbors. Danish merchants were hacked down in the streets. Families were burned alive inside churches where they sought sanctuary. And among the victims, so the whispers claim, was Gunhild, sister of the King of Denmark. Ethelred had sown the wind. Now Uhtred would reap the whirlwind, because Denmark's king was Sweyn Forkbeard, and Sweyn wasn't a raider hunting silver. He was a monarch, a brilliant general, and now, a man consumed by cold rage. He didn't want gold. He wanted the crown. He wanted Ethelred's head. By 1013, Sweyn's retribution arrived. This wasn't a raid. It was a full invasion force. Disciplined, ruthless, terrifyingly organized. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle describes it with chilling simplicity. They lit their war beacons as they went. They burned their way across England, turning the wealthy south into smoking ruin. And Ethelred did what he did best. He froze. The resistance collapsed. Earls surrendered. The entire structure of the English state began to melt under the heat of the Danish advance. Up in the north, Uhtred watched the reports come in like a weather forecast predicting a hurricane. He'd secured the border against the Scots, but the Scots were nothing compared to Sweyn Forkbeard. Uhtred was the most powerful man in England's north, the king's son-in-law, the supposed shield of the realm. but he served a king who had already lost, and the dilemma he faced was brutal. In the 11th century, loyalty wasn't abstract. It was a contract. You fight for the king. The king protects you. But what happens when the king can't protect anything? What happens when loyalty means suicide? Sweyn marched north and anchored his fleet in the River Humber, right on Uhtred's doorstep. He didn't attack immediately. He waited. Because Sweyn knew Uhtred's reputation. He knew about the heads on Durham's walls. And without even speaking it aloud, he offered Uhtred a choice. Bow and keep your lands, or bleed for a ghost king who has already abandoned you. Uhtred looked at his armies. He looked at Sweyn's fleet, and he looked south, toward Ethelred, hiding in London. Then Uhtred made his calculation. In the late summer of 1013, he rode south, not to fight, to surrender. He rode to Gainsborough, to Sweyn Forkbeard's camp, and bent the knee. This moment defines the real Uhtred more than any battle. He was the king's son-in-law, the hammer of the Scots, the shield of the North, and yet he became the first major English noble to submit to the Danes. He didn't just surrender, he set a trend. Northumbria followed, then the 5 boroughs of the Danelaw. By capitulating, Uhtred handed Sweyn the keys to England. Was Uhtred a coward? No. He was a realist. He saw Ethelred's cause as a rotting corpse, and he refused to bury his people with it. So he chose a living Danish king over a dying English one. And at first, the bet paid off. Sweyn swept south, took London, and forced Ethelred to flee into exile in Normandy. For a brief, shining moment, Uhtred had backed the winner. The North was safe. His power was secure. Then history played its cruelest joke. On February 3rd, 1014, just weeks after becoming master of England, Sweyn Forkbeard sat down for dinner and dropped dead. Some chroniclers say he fell from his horse. Others claim the ghost of St. Edmund struck him down. The medical reality was likely a stroke. Either way, the most powerful man in the northern world was gone before he could even be crowned. And the vacuum was catastrophic. The Danish fleet proclaimed Sweyn's younger son as ruler, King Canute. But the English nobility saw their chance. They sent word to exiled Ethelred in Normandy. They invited him back, with conditions that read like a modern prenup. Rule more justly, or don't come at all. Ethelred agreed, and he sailed back to England with vengeance in his heart, which put Uhtred in an impossible position. He had betrayed his father-in-law to serve Sweyn. Sweyn was dead, and now Ethelred was returning. Most men would flee. Uhtred recalculated. He looked at the young, inexperienced Canute. He looked at the returning king, and he realized the Danes were temporarily confused, leaderless, unsteady, so Uhtred flipped again. He rode to Ethelred, likely fell to his knees, and pledged loyalty back to the king he had abandoned months earlier. It was audacious beyond belief, and shockingly, Ethelred accepted it. He needed Uhtred's swords too badly to execute him for treason. United once more, Uhtred and Ethelred moved against the Danes. Canute, still not the legend he would become, was caught off guard. He fled to his ships and sailed back to Denmark, but not before leaving a parting gift soaked in terror. He'd taken hostages from noble English families. Before sailing, he cut off their hands, ears, and noses, and dumped the mutilated captives on the beach at Sandwich. A warning: I will return. For Uhtred, the immediate danger had passed. He had survived invasion, treason, counter-revolution. He was back in power. His wife was still a princess. His enemies seemed gone. But by flipping sides twice in 1 year, Uhtred had marked himself. To the English, indispensable, but untrustworthy. To the Danes, a traitor who rejected their chosen heir. Uhtred survived the tsunami. But the water was already receding, revealing sharp rocks underneath. And Knut was not a man who forgot. In the summer of 1015, the nightmare returned. King Knut sailed back to England, and this time he didn't come with a raid. He came with an armada, 200 longships. These weren't ragtag pirates chasing silver. These were professional soldiers, shields overlapping, discipline hardened, their mission singular. Total conquest. England fractured instantly. The southern aristocracy, led by the infamous traitor Uhtred Striona, defected to Knut almost immediately. Uhtred is a man who deserves an entire documentary on his own. A politician so treacherous, he makes Littlefinger look like a saint. But all you need to know here is this. He took 40 ships and handed them to the Danes. King Ethelred was dying in London. The defense of the realm fell to his son, Prince Edmund Ironside. And Edmund was everything his father wasn't. Brave, physically imposing, relentless. But he couldn't fight this war alone. He needed the North. He needed Uhtred, and Uhtred answered the call. He rode south, uniting his hardened Northumbrian veterans with Edmund's remaining loyalists. On paper, this was the dream team. The legendary northern warlord, the indomitable southern prince. Together, they should have marched straight at Knut and crushed him. But this is where the story turns dark. Instead of attacking the Danes immediately, Uhtred and Edmund turned their swords on their own countrymen. They launched a scorched earth campaign through Staffordshire and Shropshire, lands controlled by the traitor Uhtred Striona. Picture it. Uhtred, the supposed protector, burning English villages, slaughtering English cattle, destroying English harvests. It wasn't heroic defense. It was a punitive civil war, a brutal message to anyone considering joining Knut. Traitors will not be governed. They will be erased. But while Uhtred and Edmund were busy turning the Midlands into ash, Knut made a move of tactical brilliance. He didn't take the bait. He didn't march south to defend his allies. He studied the map and saw a gaping hole. With Uhtred fighting in the south, Northumbria was undefended. So Knut marched north, bypassing the English army entirely. He aimed straight for York. It was checkmate. News reached Uhtred in the smoking ruins of Staffordshire. The Danes are in your home, and the psychological blow was devastating. If Uhtred stayed with Edmund, Knut would burn York and Bamburgh to the ground, slaughtering Uhtred's people and his family. If Uhtred raced north to save them, he would abandon Edmund and leave England's flank exposed. So Uhtred did the only thing a feudal lord could do. He chose his own lands over the kingdom. He abandoned Edmund Ironside and raced north. But Knut was faster. By the time Uhtred crossed the Humber, the Danes already held the advantage. The north was effectively occupied. Uhtred had no army large enough to dislodge Knut, and his southern ally was now fighting for his life alone. Uhtred had been outmaneuvered. The truth settled in. Resistance was impossible. To save his people from massacre, Uhtred of Bebbanburg had to do the unthinkable. For the second time in his life, he had to submit to a Danish conqueror. He sent messengers asking Knut for terms, and Knut, playing the magnanimous king, agreed. He invited Uhtred to a peace conference at a place called Wiheal. He promised safe conduct, a sacred guarantee that no harm would come to Uhtred during the meeting. Uhtred, exhausted and seeing no other option, accepted. He prepared to ride to Wiheal, believing his value as a northern ruler would keep him alive. He was wrong, because he wasn't riding into negotiation. He was riding into a trap that had been waiting years to snap shut. not set by Cnut, but by the enemy Uhtred failed to kill. Spring 1016. The roads to Wiheal were slick with mud and melting snow. Uhtred rode at the head of a column of 40 men, his housecarls, elite bodyguards sworn to die for him, the finest warriors in Northumbria, mail-clad, carrying the great axes that had cleaved through Scots and Danes alike. But as they approached the meeting place, their weapons were sheathed. They were traveling under grid, safe conduct. In the Norse and Anglo-Saxon world, grid wasn't just a promise. It was sacred legal status. To harm a man under safe conduct was to curse yourself before gods and men. Uhtred had every reason to be cautious, but he rode like a man who believed himself indispensable. Earl of Bamberg and York, survivor of 3 kings and 2 invasions. Surely Cnut needed him. Surely the young Dane would rather employ Uhtred than destroy him. But Uhtred made a fatal miscalculation. He assumed Cnut saw him as an asset. In reality, Cnut saw him as a liability. Look at Uhtred's resume. He betrayed Ethelred for Sweyn, then betrayed Sweyn's memory to return to Ethelred. He fought against Cnut, then begged peace when cornered. To Cnut, a man who prized loyalty above all else, Uhtred wasn't a powerful lord. He was a weather vane, spinning whichever way the wind blew, and Cnut had no intention of building an empire on shifting sands. Waiting at Wiheal wasn't just the king, it was Thorbrand the Bold. You remember him. Years earlier, Uhtred married Sigge under one condition. He would kill Thorbrand. He took the wife. He never delivered the corpse. And Thorbrand spent those years watching, festering, and waiting. Now he had Cnut's ear, and while Uhtred rode toward Wiheal believing he was meeting a king, Cnut and Thorbrand were scripting something else entirely. Wiheal was likely a royal hall, long wooden structure, high roof, one defensible entrance, built for feasting. But the architecture of a feast hall is terrifyingly similar to a slaughterhouse. When Uhtred arrived, the atmosphere would have been suffocating. Cnut's soldiers watching in silence, no insults, no weapons drawn. The illusion of peace had to hold until the final second. Uhtred and his 40 men dismounted. They were invited inside to feast. Tradition demanded they leave primary weapons at the door. To enter a king's hall armed was aggression. Trusting in grid, trusting in his legend. Uhtred stepped across the threshold. Dim light, heavy air, no smell of roasting meat, only stale rushes and dust. Something was wrong. A veteran warrior's instincts would have started screaming. The hall was too quiet, the shadows too deep. Then the curtain moved. Not gently. It was torn aside. Behind it stood armed men, chainmail rattling in the silence. At their center wasn't King Cnut. It was Thorbrand the Bold. The trap was sprung. What followed wasn't a duel. It was an execution. Thorbrand's soldiers poured in, blocking the exit. Uhtred and his 40 housecarls, Northumbria's best, were trapped in a killing box, likely unarmed. But Northumbrians don't die easily. Tables overturned, eating knives snatched up, men fighting barehanded. Wooden benches swung like clubs against steel-clad attackers. It was chaos, intimate and absolute. One by one, Uhtred's bodyguards fell. Men who had sworn to die with their lord and fulfilled that oath to the letter. Not a single man of Uhtred's retinue walked out alive. And then Uhtred the Bold himself. The man who braided Scottish heads, the man who held the North for a decade, was cut down. No final words, no cinematic destiny speech, just the sharp bite of steel and the cold realization he'd been outplayed. When the screaming stopped, Wiheal returned to silence, and Nut's hands remained clean. Technically, he hadn't lifted a finger. He simply allowed a local rival to settle a local score. Plausible deniability, a master stroke. With Uhtred dead, Nut reorganized. He appointed one of his own trusted lieutenants, a Norwegian named Eric of Hlathar, to rule Northumbria. The message was clear. The time of native warlords is over. The time of the Vikings has truly begun. But if Knut thought killing Uhtred would bring peace, he was mistaken. In the Anglo-Saxon world, blood calls for blood. The murder at Wiheal triggered a Northumbrian feud that would rage for generations. Uhtred's son, Ealdred, took up the duty of vengeance. He hunted Thurbrand for years and butchered him. Then Thurbrand's son, Karl, inherited the obligation and killed Ealdred in the forest of Risewood after swearing brotherhood. Then, years later, Waltheof II, Uhtred's grandson, rose to power and massacred Karl's sons in a manor house near York, blocking the doors and setting it ablaze. Half a century of vengeance, all born from one curtain being ripped aside in a muddy feast hall. This is the real legacy of Uhtred the Bold. Not a united kingdom, not a peaceful dynasty, a slaughterhouse spanning 3 generations. Because in the 11th century, power wasn't a prize you won. It was a debt you accumulated, and the creditors always came to collect. By 1066, England's landscape shifted again. The Danes were no longer the threat, the Normans were. William the Conqueror sat the throne, and the old Anglo-Saxon aristocracy was dismantled brick by brick. Yet one relic remained. Waltheof I, Uhtred's grandson. A giant of a man. So strong chroniclers claimed he could decapitate multiple Normans with a single swing at the Battle of York. Like his grandfather, he tried to survive by making alliances. He even married William's niece, Judith, to secure his safety. It almost worked. But in 1075, Waltheof made the kind of mistake Uhtred would recognize instantly. He got involved in a plot, the revolt of the Earls, a drunken conspiracy hatched at a wedding feast to overthrow William. Waltheof tried to back out, confessed to the church, even traveled to Normandy to beg forgiveness. He expected mercy. But William wasn't Ethelred. He wasn't a man who negotiated with slippery warlords. He was a state builder. He looked at Waltheof and saw a loose thread from the old Anglo-Saxon tapestry. So he cut it. On May 31st, 1076, Waltheof was led to St. Giles's Hill near Winchester, dressed in finery, stripped of titles. He knelt in the grass and asked for a moment to finish the Lord's Prayer. The executioner didn't wait, as he whispered, "And lead us not into temptation." The sword fell. With that blow, Uhtred's line was extinguished as a political force. Northumbria was broken up, lands redistributed to Norman barons. The fierce independence Uhtred defended with such brutality was finally tamed. And the irony is brutal. Uhtred built power by surviving chaos, switching sides, trading wives, killing rivals. His grandson died because he tried to follow the rules of a new world, a stricter world, where old warlords had no place. The era of blood feuds was ending. The era of centralized tyranny had begun. And if you go to Durham today, you won't see heads on spikes. You'll see a magnificent cathedral, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, standing on the same ground where washerwomen once scrubbed gore from Uhtred's trophies. The stones of that cathedral were laid, in part, by Uhtred himself, a monument to the duality of his life, builder of churches, butcher of men. So who was the real Uhtred the Bold? Not the brooding pagan hero screaming, "Destiny is all." Something far more terrifying, something far more human. He was a survivor, a man who lived in a world where the only options were to kill, to marry, or to submit. And he did all three with ruthless efficiency, so sharp it almost feels like art. The TV show gives closure. Hero wins, villain dies, sword is sheathed. Real history offers no comfort. It teaches that power is fragile. Violence echoes through generations, and even the boldest men become nothing more than names in a crumbling manuscript. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the brutal reality of the 11th century, hit that like button. It helps the channel more than you know. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss our next documentary uncovering another historical figure the movies got wrong. And I want to hear from you in the comments. Do you prefer the honorable Uhtred from the show, or the ruthless political survivor we met today? Let the debate begin. Until next time, keep looking behind the curtain.